Johanna, welcome to the Classical Odyssey. It is such an honor to have you here. I'm so much looking forward to today's interview. Your name is a very big one that resonates across all the meridians, I'm really sure, in the world of fine arts and sculpture. And your story has to be absolutely fantastic, unique, because as far as I know, you were born in one of the epicenters of culture and arts, which is Austria, specifically Salzburg. And I would like to hear a little bit about that journey that started in Salzburg, because I myself associate Austria, which I've seen, especially Vienna, I associate it with the big arts, the monumental arts, the big architecture, imperial aesthetics, obviously traditional art, and so on. But your journey was not that predictable as you might think. So I would like to ask you, how did you start being aware? When did you, for the first time, receive this awareness of having this inclination towards fine arts and specifically sculpture, which is quite rare. Sculpture is not a very common branch of the arts.
Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I really like your channel. And I was just thinking yesterday, Classical Odyssey it fits so perfectly. I love that name.
Thank you.
And I think a lot of artists that work in that field, it's an odyssey for many of us. And so I'm so happy to share my story with you today. To your question, how I got this love for traditional art and this interest in the arts in general. Salzburg, where I'm from, Salzburg, Austria, is a Baroque town in the Pre-Alps. It is a Baroque town in the sense, like, it's very tiny, it's in the mountains, and it has a lot of Baroque churches, and that has to do with its history of archbishops that wanted to invest in the Baroque art. So it has been a medieval city for a long time. It kind of skipped Renaissance, and then they wanted to invest everything into this, at the time, 17th century or 18th century Baroque art from Rome, right? So there's more big Baroque churches than could fit people at the time. So that was Salzburg, and that's where I grew up. So I was always surrounded by this monumental art, as you were saying, and these, fountains on public places. And as a child, I was always fascinated by that. And I remember walking with my father over these squares and asking tons of questions and being just amazed, thinking people who made that kind of art are from some other dimension almost. Like, how can they even do that? And I decided to go to art school when I was 15. So in Austria, there you have the opportunity to join high school with a major that is some sort of craft. So that exists. We also have an apprentice system, but the technical school system is very good in a way where you can learn math and German and English and history, but also choose a major. And I chose sculpture. And when I did that, the reason I wanted to do that was my father was an art teacher as well, and he taught me drawing and painting in a very young age. And I was a very introverted child. I loved escaping into my little world and just draw and paint and be by myself. So I enrolled in sculpture, hoping I could express all these things sculpturally, because I loved clay as well. That was just my world of creating. And when I was, I want to say 17, 18, towards the end of that school, so that was in Salzburg, Halle, it's the HDL Halle. And I had great teachers that knew a lot about the craft of carving in marble and carving in stone or in wood. And I learned a lot, but at one point I thought what I felt was missing is the depiction of the human body, and then these ornaments that I loved seeing in all this architecture. What we were really encouraged to do was carve in marble, carve in stone, but express ourselves in abstract ways, have a little clay model where you wanted to propose your ideas and then translate that into another material. And I loved doing that, but I remember there was a turning point in my journey that was very significant. And so the sculpture department where I was tiny, so it was only me and 4 other students in the class. It has changed now, it's much larger now, but at that time when I was there was early 90s, when I was 17, 18, mid-90s, I'm not that old. But so that specific day, I think, was a turning point because our teachers asked us to help clean out the attic. So the sculpture department was in the top floor. It's these like stone walls. The building is not there anymore. But they asked us to walk upstairs, take out everything, like all the boxes and all the junk, and clean it up to make room for storage. And so we took out these boxes. They're really dusty, and opened them up and like trying to see what do we want to keep and what do we want to throw away. And so I found in the attic, and me and my colleagues found these amazing, beautiful relief works, ornaments of some Gothic, some Baroque looking. And then there was examples of carved feet, and portraits. So these amazing carvings. And I immediately assumed, oh wow, these must have been from some old masters.
They were not signed.
They were not signed. And I asked my teachers, so what is this? This is a treasure. It felt literally like a treasure that I found, or we found together with my colleagues. And my teacher at the time said, well, this is students' work from before World War II and World War I. This is students' work. And so I was blown away. I was like, these were done by students my age. And they said, yes, that was the curriculum before World War II. And that made me think a lot. And I was very naive at the time. I didn't have that much education when it comes to art history and how art history developed in my country. And that was the first time when I thought, like, how come that we pretend that the self-expression, novelty, and abstract work that we do is somehow superior to these crafts? Like, and how come that we can't, or so far away from being able to do that? And so I challenged my teachers on that, and I think along the lines, like they're great great sculptors as well, but the answer I received were along the line that everybody can be a craftsman, but not everybody can be an artist. And so I was thinking, like, what does that mean? And so I realized, in a modern sense, what is understood to be an artist is when you have some sort of novelty to offer and a lot of self-expression. And that was what we were encouraged to do. And we largely sacrificed craft. So I was not able to depict these ornaments and the human figure, but we were encouraged to express ourselves in these ways. And I thought, this is not superior when you are not equipped with a craft that you can really express yourself. And I still agree with that thought that everybody can be a craftsman and not everybody can be an artist. I still do agree with that. But I think it's not detached from one another. Like, I think you have to have your language, your craft, and your strong way of expressing. And then when you love what you do and you get very good at what you do, you add something to it that, in my eyes, I would call art. So that experience really changed my attitude towards traditional art and towards craft.
Absolutely. I just wanted to make a small parenthesis because I was reading through your, let's say, statement on your webpage, and you wrote so beautifully about how you see art, and you define art as life. It's something so large because art is about celebrating life. I think we both agree on that. And I will just read just the first phrases, that every creative impulse from the beginning to its realization is an intimate interaction with the self and the reality we focus on. All intentions are transmitted into the finished artwork. All intentions are transmitted into the finished artwork, which is all these components that you talked about. There's many levels. You have the foundations, and then you build on those foundations your personal contribution, which is your philosophy, your vision, your emotion. And you say that, I believe artwork cannot be experienced by the intellect, but has to work on body, spirit, and mind. Artwork, which vibrates on all three levels, is the masterwork. And I wanted to ask you if what you think about, because I think one of the biggest problems we have today that keeps us behind is the fear of exceptionalism. We fear it because we see it as something unachievable, or we fear it because it will create some sort of hierarchy of value or quality, and we don't like that today because we want things to be equal. And it's also this aura of mystery because we have this rupture that you noticed. So I think that's what you identify, people who wanted to be exceptional at what they were doing. And I think today we settle for a little bit less.
Yeah, what you're touching on, I think, is right in the heart of the philosophical discussion of what art is. And I have learned, and this on my personal odyssey, on how I define art and beauty. And because where I come from in Austria, and modern art was so prevalent, even though we have this long history, and classical art is so present and traditional art is so present, yet people my age in the 90s and early 2000s are very much pushed into modern art. So when you talk about equalizing things and the fear of exceptionalism, I think there is in modern art actually elitism in the way of where only a few can access it, where the idea is more important than the artwork. The visual concept is not as important as the idea behind it. So it's only concept. There's no visual component to it any longer in a lot of cases. And to me, that's not equalizing at all. To me, that is really creating an elite realm where only a few people, if you understand it, then you are the so-called initiated, that is educated enough to be part of this art group. So when you often stay in a modern gallery and you look at the artwork and you kind of don't get what's so great about it, and then the concept is explained, and if you're still like, okay, that's nice, but I don't really understand, there's an elitism to that. And so I think often in modern art, equality is promoted, but I don't actually see it, because this elite idea, so the everyday person walking into a very contemporary gallery would not be able to connect with it unless they have learned about the specific artist, the specific background, the gallery, and unless they don't have all this knowledge, there's no way they can access the art and the idea behind it. So that's one aspect. And then wanting to become exceptional at what you do, I do believe that has been a little bit taken away from us in the last, I want to say after World War II. And that has a huge comeback. The thought that if you work hard and you really put your mind towards what you want to do, you can be exceptional. I think that has had a huge comeback, maybe from the early 2000s to now. I see lots of movements working on that. And I met lots of artists that are working on that. And that wasn't so much present when I was a teenager just finishing school. I didn't know, how can I learn the crafts that I wanted to learn, and I couldn't find any education on an academic level after I graduated from that high school. I actually started studying art history in the hopes of learning from old masters and learning how to appreciate multi-figural compositions and the symbolism and the intentions behind it in order to enrich my personal art with that.
I wanted to ask you something that we both talked about, which I never thought about, I never read about it, but we have these two concepts that probably I use them erroneously sometimes because they're interchangeable in my own personal speech. Classical arts or traditional arts, I use classicism in the sense that it's universal. Usually I refer to art history in general up until the early 20th century. But what is the perception that you noticed in Austria regarding traditional arts? Because that changed a lot since the Second World War, and that's what you shared. And if you could,
there was a humongous change when you look at art coming out of Austria and surrounding countries. Austria is in mid-Europe, so Austria is very known for classical music more than its art, but there has been a lot of art as well. But what happened after World War II in our country is that we were on the wrong side of things, right? So obviously the culture suffered tremendously from that. And there was this crisis, I want to say globally, but especially in countries such as Austria and Germany, where we or our generation or the generation of my grandparents were not allowed to celebrate their own culture in the way they used to. And that changed the educational system, that it changed the art market, where you were not supposed to dock onto the traditions of our own country because it was seen as Nazi ideology, really, after the World War II. And I remember talking to an older sculptor that I was also learning some metal work from. He was older and I think that was like in the early 2000s. I was working alongside him in a workshop, and I already started making my more classical or traditional artworks that I wanted to cast in bronze. And he said to me one day, "It's like, Johanna, if I wanted to depict the human figure just the way you do when I was younger, but everybody would have called me a Nazi at that time if I would have done that." And so that was like shocking to me to hear that something so universal and so ingrained for thousands of years in our culture is now taken away from us because of political reasons. And art and its beauty is eternal. And that made me think like it shouldn't be a trend, and it shouldn't be a political reaction to anything. It should be, wanting to be exceptional in it and wanting that beauty in our lives. So that is something that is sad. Like now it is starting to change, and I think we're celebrating a comeback in so many ways.
That's really sad. So it was the tragedy of the Second World War and the political arena of Europe stained for many decades to come things that are beautiful and they're good and exceptional. And that's very sad. And I think that also has to do with the fact that I think in general the collective memory is very short of people, and they just need figures sometimes to gradually bring them back to the lost memory, and have also the power of the association is so strong.
Yes.
Because we tend to think in very small, narrow compartments, which is sometimes very good, but we very often lose track of the bigger picture.
Yes. And there's so much trauma, collective trauma, obviously after war. And you know that too. You're from Romania, I'm from Austria. There's so much collective trauma, like that you can even tell in the family. And I think that connecting with tradition has a tremendous healing power for collectively and also individually. And engaging with art has healing power as well. So these key moments for me were essential to like strengthen my love for traditional art, where I was like, okay, I want to keep walking in this journey, and I want to keep finding ways to train myself and work on my own art as much as possible. And so during the years where I was studying art history, I could engage more with like old masters' work. And with old masters, I mean mainly Renaissance masters, Italian Renaissance, and then Baroque, and then also German masters that I wanted to engage with, and then see what is the difference. What did we have? What did we lose along the way? And what is not offered anymore? And as I said, the educational system did not offer that. So people often are surprised. I live now in the United States, and that lineage in the United States was, in a lot of ways, it faded a lot as well, but it wasn't as interrupted as it was in Europe. I can see that now. Moving to the United States, I could see there's way more artists throughout
There's decades. Continuity.
There's a continuity, maybe not in its depth. So there wasn't like a academy offered where people could just go and learn these traditional skills like throughout the decades. That wasn't there, but there was always people that kept their interest really alive.
That's amazing. So it sounds like the beautiful Austria gave you this formative experience, gave you the questions and also gave you the answers. But at the same time, the environment seemed to be quite incorporating, because you couldn't have, it didn't allow you to develop fully as an artist. How did your journey continue from there?
Oh yeah, excuse me. There has been a few stepping stones that I hold dearly in my memory that really helped me on this journey, because it was challenging in a way where, as I said, in the late 90s, it was all modern art. So if you were young and you wanted to learn art, you had to get into like a modern art, either university, academy, and then connect with galleries. So that was the only path at that time. And me not doing that, I was a little bit like seen as a dinosaur. And a lot of people told me like, "What are you doing? Like, this is over. Like, just give up on it," kind of. And luckily, I'm very stubborn. And but then I had also great people in my life that helped, fill in the void in some moments. And I remember very clearly I want to say 2003, I was invited to help an artist that his name is Chang Kun-lun. He's an artist from China, and he's sort of living in exile because he was persecuted for his spiritual belief in China. He was a monumental sculptor. He was very successful in China. He's now in his 80s. And at that time, when I was reaching out if I could help in his studio, I was really very nervous because he's been doing like these beautiful Buddhist-inspired sculptures that I really loved seeing, and I saw pictures of, and then introduced myself to him if I could come for a few weeks and just work alongside him and assist in his studio. And he's living now in New York, upstate New York, and works in the studio. And so that was the summer of 2003 where I was invited to go and work alongside him. And so that was another experience where I realized it's not only the craft that I need to be looking for and to get better at, but also it is also a philosophical attitude towards art that inspired me so much. Because Professor Chang Kun-lun now, what he brings into his art, he's very much tapping onto appreciating the beauty for what it is without bringing himself too much into it. So he has this like high standard of beauty. He calls it divine beauty. And you see that in his work where he is really giving that so much honor and care to make the forms beautiful. And he is leaving himself out of that. And that is the exact opposite from what I was taught earlier on in a modern sense, where you're supposed to bring yourself a lot into it.
It's mostly an introspective process today. I think it's all about introspection, digging into your own being, I think. Use the touch.
That was such a stark contrast to what I was taught earlier, to only think of like self-expression and novelty and find your voice in the art market with like something new, something exciting. And I think a lot of people do that, and it turns into something very bizarre because you cannot only focus on the new thing in the self-expression, you have to tie it with a universal language. And so Professor Chang, he was persecuted in China for his spiritual belief, and I think through that process, he also learned to connect even deeper with his universal values, because he was forced to give himself up and connect with a divine higher self through that process. So just to give a little bit of background, he's practicing Falun Gong, which is a Buddhist Qigong practice, and that is severely persecuted in China to this day. The persecution started in 1999. Professor Chang was a very celebrated artist in the 80s and 90s, but then when he started to practice Falun Gong, not only did he lose his career, he was also imprisoned and tortured, and he didn't know if he would survive it. But he did not give up on the artwork that he wanted to portray, and he did not give up on his spiritual belief. And now that he's living in the United States creating these monumental, beautiful Buddhist-inspired artwork, you can see that, and you can see his spiritual journey throughout that. And that was highly inspiring to me, that if you want to aim for that kind of beauty, you have to kind of overcome yourself. You have to have virtues in place and universal principles, and aim for that kind of beauty as something that is beyond your own emotional self. So when I want to compare that, what I experienced 2003, and then in my teenage years, when I was like, okay, express yourself. It's like, as a teenager, you don't even know what yourself is. You change all the time. Like teenagers get tattoo. I got a tattoo when I was 16 years old. I had it lasered away later. You change so much when you're a teenager. You don't even know what you believe in yet. You're complete full of emotion. So to make something as permanent as a sculpture at that age and be like pushed so hard to like self-express yourself or express your inner world in that way, there can be an educational aspect to that, but I think there needs to be a foundational groundwork first, where you learn your craft, where you develop yourself, you cultivate your inner self, and you learn techniques that you can actually use. And with that, overcoming yourself, learning the techniques, because like traditional art is hard. You come across moments where you're not even sure if you can do that because it's so difficult. So in these moments, you have to keep overcoming yourself And I think with that, your artwork enriches with that cultivation.
That's beautiful. That's one of the things that I really love about arts. It just reminds me of, it makes me think about eternity all the time when I create something, because I'm so aware of the fact that this process does not have a finish line. You're never gonna reach the top of the mountain, and it's really beautiful because you touch upon so many very important topics, such as having the proper form, learning the form, learning the craft. But that form has to be filled with some sort of substance and essence that can only be infused with your own universe of knowledge, of experience of the world, of life, your belief system, and it's ultimately a search for the truth, because I think this is what unites all the arts. That's why we relate to them, because they tell us something about the absolute truth, the ultimate truth. That's what makes the language of arts universal and accessible to us transculturally and outside of time. Looking back at something that was created 2,000 years ago, it evokes kind of the same feelings, and there's no bridge between us and the people who looked at them 2,000 years ago. So my next question was, what is your academic experience? What are the academic approaches that you've experienced, and what did you learn about them? Were they freeing? Were they more incorporating? And how did you get to the United States? But that's actually a later question. I would just like to go back to your journey a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, being in that studio in 2003 with Professor Chung and everything, and seeing his excellence, and then also his philosophical background and everything, that was mind-blowing to me. What is even possible? So it really raised my standard of what I could achieve. So when I moved back when I returned to Austria, I was looking for education and more on an academic level. I already knew that there is not really a school, because in the academic level, there's only modern arts in Austria. I already knew that. But then I heard of the Florence Academy of Art in Italy, and I already had public commissions at that time, and it worked. And I could also see that people are interested in traditional art, and I did the best I could, and I was working very hard on monuments, on graveyards, and for churches. So I did get commissions outside of the contemporary art market. That was more like to people like that, like creating a little bit of a name for myself. But I knew I lacked training. I needed more training. So when I heard of the Florence Academy of Art in Italy, which is, by the way, an American academy in Italy, it's not Italian. It's founded by Daniel Graves. He's from Boston. I enrolled right away, and I was really excited to go. And so I moved to Italy, completely immersing myself in what they had to offer. And my teacher, Robert Bodum, at the time, he was the director of the sculpture department of the Florence Academy of Art, and I'm very grateful for his input. He has this very, very efficient way of sculpting the human figure that he calls drawing in space, like sculpt modeling, but drawing in space. So that is like a term that he kind of coined for himself, because it's really like the way he teaches it is very observational, very structural, but very efficient. And I really appreciate that, because there wasn't any ideological, philosophical heaviness to it. There was not like we showed up in the morning. Yeah, hands-on. You show up in the morning. You have a lot of hours with the model and a lot of time to model in clay, and you get your critiques, and it's very efficient. And I really needed that at that time, and I really loved also connecting with other artists at the time. Lots of friends I made and lots of contacts that I made that I still really appreciate and be in contact with. And so when you touched on earlier, okay, but how do you bring your own universe into that? So when you are in an academy like that, and all you do is really focus on technique, there is little room for your own self too. So I think this is a balance, because when you say like, oh, we should bring back traditional techniques and we should focus on craft, where is the art in that? Because I was just mentioning earlier, we as a collectively globally, we went to the other extreme where we let go of craft and we only focused on concept. So, and then like now I'm saying, like, you need your craft to express yourself and to dock onto universal language others can read and understand. So I believe that strongly. But where's yourself in that? So after 3 years of studying at the Florence Academy of Art, and I experienced a little bit of a crisis in terms of like, where's my voice? Where is what, you know, thinking of like earlier when I mentioned my childhood, loving getting lost in my drawings and my clay work, and my father bringing new art supplies, and I just like was eager to go into my own universe. So after being so academic, like, where is that? Like, is that dried out? Can I just, you know, connect with that again? And that is something that also a lot of my colleagues experienced when they finish graduating from an academy like that and only focusing on technique and then moving back to their countries, opening up their own studio. Now I'm trying to understand, like, okay, where is my voice? What do I want to do with that? And so I moved back to Austria. First, I got a teaching position at that school where I was when I was a teenager, which I was really, really happy, because I could bring in a lot of the craft that I learned in Italy in that school. So I started teaching there, but that was only like a couple hours a day or a couple days a week. So I still had a lot of time in my studio and working by myself. And so to overcome that search, I don't want to call it a crisis, because crisis sounds so like dramatic. It wasn't necessarily a crisis. It's more like, okay, a searching. Like, what do you want to say now? Like, now you have a language. You were longing for a language. Now you have one. What is the poem? What's the poetry with that language, right? So what I just kind of like to get over that. I started to try to find like poses that I was like inspired by. But then I realized I also wanted to connect with story. Like, I wanted to say things that really move me. And I did a few things. Like, one was, so my final work at the Florence Academy of Art was Joan of Arc. I wanted to create Joan of Arc because I just really loved her story, being a saint that is seeing her universal values more important in her life. Like, that was just something that really inspired me so much. Also, after meeting somebody like Professor Chan Kun-lun, who is now alive and faced exactly that, where he had to say, like, do I stick to my spiritual belief, or, you know, or my life is at stake here. So that's, to me, was so powerful. So Joan of Arc was my final work at the Florence Academy of Art, and I loved doing it, and had the opportunity to really pick my own theme at that time, which wasn't very common, but my group was very small, so I got to pick my own theme and bring in a little bit of my own artwork. So back in Austria, so I'm going back and forth a little bit, but there's so many components to the whole story. But back in Austria, when I was like, okay, what do I want to do? Docking onto the Joan of Arc idea, I made a series called Ether, which was connected to the idea of human creation. Like a little bit like Eve out of nothing. Like, ether is like, you know, I connected that with the idea of like there's an overarching divine force that creates everything, and out of that, human beauty is born. And so I did a male and a female figure titled Ether, and that was really fun because I had my own model in my studio. I would be teaching, you know, at that school and teenagers, and I loved connecting with them and to teach what I had to offer, and then in my spare time work on these things. And that was really important time for me to replenish myself artistically, and also being able to pass on what I knew. And the other thing that happened, which was fascinating, was that more and more people connected with that idea of bringing back traditional art in my hometown of Salzburg. And so there was an investor that loved that idea, and he had a little castle that he renovated, and said, well, why don't you help use the connections that you made in Italy and bring in some of your colleagues, and we start a gallery that way. And so I was all of a sudden in the position of a curator, and contacted colleagues of mine that I thought were great at what they do. And at that time, I also visited India, and I had a really good Indian sculptor friend that I contacted. Like, his name is Devashish Behra, fantastic wood carver. He can carve with a chainsaw and then with some chisels, not even great chisels. He can carve out of a giant tree, like in a couple of days, like this, like beautiful figures. not coming from an academic background, but just like doing it, you know. So I knew people like that at that time, and I would be bringing them and displaying that in Salzburg at that gallery in this little castle. So it kind of like all like seemed to come together, and I was so invested in the idea of bringing that back to my hometown, Salzburg, and bringing in, and so that we had Spanish artists that would be coming, and then actually a Polish artist, Jacobo, a fantastic sculptor, he came as well and was displayed, and I could see in the reaction of the people that they were amazed by the craftsmanship plus the artistic outcome of it. So it had kind of both. And the only problem at the time was that I was burning out a little bit, like doing too much, doing my own art, teaching, trying to curate this, trying to work on this mission. And so that was not very balanced. And I got really tired of doing that. And then the other thing that happened was that the investor at the time connected with a curator from Vienna and one curator from Salzburg, who both were more in the contemporary sense, in a modern sense, saying like you need to bring in these big contemporary names that are in the international market if you want your gallery to have any fame or any recognition in the international art market. And so this is when our mission a little bit split and weren't in alignment, because the investor's idea was to like maybe do both simultaneously, but I didn't see that. I didn't see bringing these two together. Those are two worlds that I thought are too far apart. And I thought we are being pioneers by bringing that back and having this new artistic voice and showing that docking onto traditional art is really empowering and healing. And so the contemporary art market at that time, at least, I saw that as strained, and I saw a lot of scheming in it and dishonesty, to be very honest with you, because we started to show people that artists, and I don't want to name anybody, but artists that had a huge name, and there was all of a sudden a piece of art hanging on the wall that would be representing a piece of rope, and then that was insured for thousands of dollars and was offered for $90,000 or something like that. I don't know it exact, but like for a lot of money, kind of like these typical minimalistic arts that you know from contemporary galleries were offered at that gallery. And I just like, you cannot stand on both sides of the fence. You have to like decide for one or the other. And I saw these kind of artworks, and it was disheartening to me because we spent so much work in creating this momentum and having these young, exciting artists, and the people responded to that so positively and were really like, you know, some people that didn't care about art that much all of a sudden said like, wow, what you guys are bringing in here as a group is really like moving me on a deeper level, because I can read the language, I can understand it, I can appreciate its beauty, I can think about it, it has ideas to it, it has kind of like more the whole picture. I'm not saying that we were all masters, that's like far from it. I think we all were some better than some others. We all are like kind of young artists in the beginning of our journeys, but what we offered was different, right? So, so this momentum was interrupted by like bringing in the contemporary sense, and
what a clash.
And it was clashing, and like I did think about maybe we can find some sort of compromise and like work these things together. But then I was telling myself, no, like you cannot stand on both sides of the fence. Like I want to really keep that mission pure as it is, and really detach myself from whatever like the contemporary idea is of the art market. So yes, that was hard because we already spent years by this time doing that, maybe like a couple years. And that summer was difficult in a way. It's like, where is my art going to go? And what are we going to do with this group of people? And so remember, I was still working at that gallery, and we had an exhibition on display by Spanish friends of mine. One was Johanna. He's a great sculptor, very successful in the work that he does. He also graduated from the Florence Academy of Art. And then some other Spanish, like younger artists that were on display at that time. And so I was kind of on gallery duty, being in the gallery. And I remember this day so well because it's really fate changing. Like I know I keep coming up with these fate changing moments, but really when I think of like Odyssey, it had these moments really that like helped me so much in
These are the formative moments. The most difficult moments are the most formative ones, because that's when we reevaluate and we either reconfirm our path or take a new path that is actually our own, our personal one, the one that we should take.
It seemed that way. Like so far, like I don't know how much of it is by design, but thinking back now, yes, like it really seemed that way when I felt stuck. That there was somewhat again light on at the end of the tunnel again, and so that day was really fate changing in a way. Whereas I was in the gallery, I was about to close up the gallery for the day. Nobody came that day. You know, it's this tiny little castle in the middle of nowhere on the countryside of Salzburg. And it's adorable. And the investor did a beautiful job in renovating it and making the gallery halls beautiful. And so I did love that castle, and I loved the whole idea of it, but kind of was grieving over letting go of like my mission not being the way I wanted to design it, because the investor had to other forces take on. So I was trying to close up the gallery, and then I'm seeing like in the distance. So when the castle has has a wrought iron gate, and there's a little park, and so I'm seeing like a group of people coming in, and I was already tired. I was like, nah, okay, whatever, I'm gonna open the door for them. And so it was, in my view, an old man and his wife and a lot of young students, international students that were traveling with him. And I thought, that's odd. And so I was showing them the paintings we had on the wall and the sculptures we had on display. And then I noticed that the older gentleman was kind of like teaching. So like, okay, he's an art teacher. And so I asked him what his background was. And he's like, well, I draw too. It's like, oh, that's nice. You know, a lot of people tell me that they draw too. So it's like, oh, that's nice. So what do you think of the paintings? And he's like, yeah, they're nice. And it's like, oh, they're nice. Like I'm used to like having, reactions like this is amazing, or something. So it's like, okay, so I was really interested in his background. And so it's like, do you want to see my work? And he handed me his sketchbook, and he was smiling, and I was like, sure. And like took his sketchbook, and then I opened it, and it was these really beautiful, masterfully done drawings, the entire sketchbook, page after page after page. And I remember being so, yeah, it was amazing. Like my jaw dropped. It was like, who are you? And I thought like this man coming from nowhere is like these absolutely unbelievable, beautiful drawing was like ink sketches and pencil drawings and so on. And his wife was smiling. It's like, so who are you? And then he introduced himself, and he said, my name is Glenn Vilppu. I have to admit, at that time, I didn't know his name because my focus was very much on the academic world that's more coming out of the East Coast of the United States, and then European artists. So I, at that time, wasn't aware of his name. And
what a surprise!
Obviously, what was that?
What a surprise to me, listening.
I just didn't know, and so I was just amazed by what I saw, and I started to ask him question after question after question to the point where it probably was annoying. But he was smiling, so friendly, like answering every question. And then I invited him to our group exhibition that wasn't taking place at that castle; it was taking place somewhere else, but happening a week later. And I invited him and his wife to please come. There was 3 of my sculptures on display. There were sculptures of these other really great artists on display. It was really was Johanna, and there was WWII, the Indian artist that I was just talking about. So it was really like people that I thought like are top sculptors, and then there was a few of my sculptures on display as well. And I was really hoping that he would come, and so I can continue that conversation. And he did show up with his wife that day, and I remember, so there was a lot of people. There was even press present because it was like a group exhibition that we had prepared for a long time. So it was a big deal, and it was a lot of work to put that up. But at that day, I was only interested like, oh, there's Glenn Vilppu. I need to talk to him. I need to ask him more questions. And so I showed him my work, and remember being even nervous, like showing him. And he said to me, well, yeah, I like what you do. I like what you do. And then he told me that he's offering a workshop in Vienna, which is a couple of hours away from from Salzburg, and I immediately signed up for that. I wanted to go and participate in his workshop as well. And so I looked at my sculpture, and he said, well, so kind of like I was sharing what I was trying to do, and you know, how the art market is in Austria, so we were talking about that. And he said, like, well, he lives near Los Angeles, and he was sharing about the art world there. And then he was turning to his wife and said, like, oh, maybe we should introduce Johanna to Joshua Jacobo at New Masters Academy. What do you think, Eleanor? And like, I remember the conversation. She said, like, well, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And then it turned to me, it's like, oh, yeah, you should go there. You should introduce yourself to Joshua Jacobo, because we really like your work. And so I'm like, I'm writing this down, like New Masters Academy, Joshua Jacobo. I'm writing this all down. And then Eleanor was laughing, or Glenn was laughing. He said, like, you know, if you go and introduce yourself, just don't call him Josh. He doesn't like that. And they're like, okay. And I'm writing down, okay, do not call him Josh. He does not like that. Okay, whatever. So I go home and research, what is this all? Like, who is Glenn really? And what is New Masters Academy? And then I realized that there's these amazing artists that are showing their method at New Masters Academy. Like these like top artists that I haven't heard of, because the Los Angeles art world, at least at that time, was a little bit disconnected maybe from what I was focusing on, or I was like maybe not savvy enough to like look online enough. And I'm not to this day, like I'm not very like online all the time, but so I didn't know, but then was floored by it. So I thought, oh, I should really go to Los Angeles and see what's going on and introduce and like see if I can connect with people like that, because I was already, as I told you, like a little bit burned out with the momentum that we used to have. So I kind of just bought a plane ticket to go to Los Angeles that same summer, after I took the class with Glenn in Vienna, and contact a friend of mine that lives in Los Angeles if I could just crash. And so that friend of mine is an artist as well, and it was funny. It's like, so he's from India, that friend that I met in India, also an artist. And I asked him, so do you mind if I stay for a couple of days? I'm just going to come visit Los Angeles. And he said, like, yeah, sure. So I'm like, because I met Glenn Vilppu. He's like, you met who? I met Glenn Vilppu. He's like, are you sure? And I'm, yeah, I'm positive. And he's like, well, you know that he's famous in India, and there's this book that a lot of artists study that is his manual. And so he kind of like got me up to speed, like what was going on here. And he's like, yeah, Johanna, you should go, and you should like definitely connect with these artists and all that. And, so the same summer I went, and Glenn had already, like, I think, introduced me to Joshua, saying like, oh, this is a sculptor from Austria. We like her work. You should talk to her. Like, he said something along these lines. So it was like, I remember like contacting Josh already in Los Angeles, like, yeah, I'm here in Los Angeles. Can I come visit your studio? Which was not in Los Angeles City. It was in Orange County. And he's like, sure. It's like very busy. Like, you know, New Masters Academy at that time was already
established.
Very established, but also had, in my point of view, like some of the greatest artists on there. And it was already like established in its way, and the best online art school in terms of quality, like for it, definitely. And so that was a funny story, because I kind of just showed up, and there's a naivete to my approach, as you can tell. Maybe like I just kind of like run into these situations. And meeting Joshua was that day I will never forget, because we had lunch and we talked for a long time, and it's like his understanding of obviously, like, he's a deep thinker, and he had such a deep idea of like where the art education should be going, what the art market does globally, and all these things that I was also thinking about like for so long, and trying all this effort into establishing. He was like, so we aligned in these ways so much that I just like left the meeting being fascinated by his mission, by his understanding, by the depth of knowledge that he already had. I mean, so that was that day, and he invited me back to teach. And so a summer after, I was invited back to not only do I was teaching portraiture, to do a video for New Masters Academy, but also teach there in person for a workshop. So that was the summer after. And so that was a beautiful summer. That was, I think, 2017. And then shortly after, I decided to move to Los Angeles. And
happy
then
ending.
What was that?
Happy ending.
A happy ending. I hope not ending. It's like also beginning of another.
It's the beginning, yes.
Eventually took on together. So
that is so beautiful. I was smiling with my heart as well when you were telling me about how you met Joshua. It's almost. I was thinking about Stefan Zweig. You're probably familiar with him. He wrote this book Sternstunden der Menschheit, which is very difficult to translate in English right now. But these astral moments in the history of humanity or in our own lives, it just feels like something outside of ourselves puts things together because we cannot explain it otherwise.
I loved Zweig. Like Stefan Zweig, he's a German author. He's like one of my favorites as well. And I think my romantic approach to things maybe comes from that kind of literature a little bit as well, where I like to read like lots of symbolism into these kinds of moments. But me moving to the United States that year obviously like changed my life completely. And now Joshua and I walk this art journey together. And I am deeply, deeply grateful to not like have, just walking this journey with him, but also being able to connect with the art world in the United States and being able to bring in all the, not only being able to express my own artwork, but being able to help with that mission.
What I think are the greatest opportunities in the United States right now as compared to the opportunities we have in Europe in terms of going back to the traditional arts or resurrecting the craft?
So it has been changing, I think, the last 10 or 20 years. It really improved. So there's more opportunities now than there was when I was first starting out. And it has been because of people like Joshua and other established artists that took the lead in these things. And that has changed the global interest quite a bit. And in Europe, it is interesting that in the United States artists from the United States took more the lead on bringing that back, from what I can tell. Maybe because there is no baggage of, war trauma in that way. Maybe it's also because, culturally, Americans are very, still pioneering in these ways, probably a combination of it, and the appreciation of beauty and tradition in the United States is more pure in a way where people search for their own roots. Because, Ruxandra, and I know too, we come from countries that are so, old and already the tradition is so present still, that is not a voice that we think we need to fill as much. I don't know how you think of it, but I never thought of I needed to dig into my ancestry as much as maybe Americans want because the culture is younger. But I think your question was more how do I see the difference in Europe to the United States?
On a positive note, in terms of opportunities, because I think we focus so much on the negative, and I know that you yourself like to not talk so much about what is wrong, but what we can do and what is already there that we can run to.
Yes, and that's really an inspiration that I gained from living in the United States, that you have to focus on what is positive and what is the opportunities versus what's not working. And that is very much Joshua's approach. He's seeing opportunities and he's digging deep into, so the way he approaches things, he goes really into the depth of the knowledge as much as he can. He's a deep researcher and thinker. And then seeing an opportunity and just really standing by that. And that strength is very inspiring and intoxicating. So it's also how people feel very safe when they see there's really a knowledge offered and an opportunity offered and a path offered too. So seeing opportunities, I think that's something Europeans need to learn to do more. And without wanting to generalize too much, like there's very optimistic Europeans as well, and I don't want to like speak in these very general terms, but me personally definitely had to learn that aspect to see opportunities more, because I came from a background where only the contemporary art market was present and prevalent and so strong, and that was the only path you could take as an artist for so long, and it was frustrating to see like, well, we are sacrificing beauty and tradition for this idea of kind of like following trends and wanting to make a name for ourselves. And really at the end of the day, it's about fame and money more than it is really about the art. And that can be very disheartening and frustrating. And if you focus on it too much, then you don't see a path. Like you can't focus on the what's not working and at the same time blaze your own path. I think you really have to shift that and then like understand what's going on, like know about it, but don't dwell on it, and then really find opportunities, research more, learn more. And this is, I think, how you can, like, this is a recipe how you can dig yourself out of any like sort of crisis to always see the opportunities. And there's been this like really great YouTube video that I love watching. I can't remember his name. So it was this conductor. He wanted to prove to the audience that classical music is loved by everyone. So it's hilarious. And
that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, the way he did that, and I think you would enjoy that YouTube video as well, was brilliant, because he said like, oh, I'm making the claim today that everybody loves classical music. You just don't know it yet. So that was his claim. And so let's take the status quo, which was like a tiny, tiny percentage, like 3% of the population love classical music. So that is a depressing prospect, right? Like, oh, only 3%. We can only get it to 5% or 7%. That would be awesome. But it's only 3%. But he still was sick. And he said like, and he told his story where there was somebody selling shoes in Africa like a long time ago. And, 3 salesmen selling Africa's shoes. That was like how he began his story. And one person calling is like, oh, no way, we cannot sell shoes here. Nobody's wearing shoes in that area. It's like, okay, nobody's wearing shoes in that area. And another salesman called, brilliant, nobody's wearing shoes yet. Great opportunity. That from that kind of direction of like, oh, that's a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's a very capitalist way of thinking in a good way. That's the great thing about capitalism, like seeing a gap somewhere in the market.
Seeing the opportunity, basically. So it was like bringing this from a very optimistic point of view. Only 3% or whatever percent it was, I don't remember, love classical music, but I know classical music is so beautiful. I know everybody loves it. That gives me an opportunity to show you. And so he's playing this piece by Chopin and then like playing it in all these different ways. And he did that so brilliantly that even the audience who not necessarily loves classical music, maybe if you do, were like giving him standing ovation at the end. And he could really prove that day that classical music is accessible to everybody, and it has these like emotional components to it that can be really moving you if you only open your heart to it and open your mind and want to learn about it.
Yeah,
that's, I love that.
That's lovely.
I hope it's still on YouTube even. I don't know.
Yeah, we need to look it up. I need to put that in the description and share.
Yeah, put it in the description. Maybe people want to look it up. It's just very I think a lot of artists also watch your channel, and it can be disheartening to see like who does even like want to purchase the things I'm doing. Where's the art market? Where's like it can lead to sort of crisis, but I think community helps to get over that and helping each other. And New Masters Academy has played a huge, tremendous role in showing people these opportunities. And there is this thriving community on Discord where people help each other in continuing in their art paths. And, you know, seeing how New Masters Academy has been growing and like influencing the art world was deeply, deeply fulfilling to see that. And the other thing I want to say, like, you know, you have interviewed Joshua separately, and he has shared his story with you and how he was navigating his art journey, which is completely different from mine. But now we're like, you know, living together as a married couple. We live now in Colorado on a ranch. I want to say, like, you know, you can watch his point of view and how he created New Masters Academy and what his background was. But seeing it from my perspective as his wife, the persona that he puts out, and he, he's a very public person by now. The persona he puts out is very authentic. Like, that's how he lives. There's no, like, he is studying absolutely every single day, talking about art all the time. So his passion is real, and he is the most hardworking, determined person you've ever met. And coming from the wife, it's almost like, oh, my mommy thinks I'm great. But I just wanted to offer the perspective as his wife, saying, like, he really lives art, and what he's putting out to the world is his authentic self. And I think that has helped trust the method too, that what he is explaining in what he's putting out there is based on deep research and thought and hard work.
That's beautiful. It's emotional in the most beautiful way possible to hear about your story. To just bring all these stories together, Joshua's and yours, and all the stories that we hear from people who feel so isolated because we have this need for beauty, and sometimes we're placed in very sad locations around the world where we see so much concrete and people who have no interest in pursuing something better, more. And it's so difficult to find the golden middle way, because what you pointed out is that there's always this reciprocity between what the artist creates and what the society demands. And usually society doesn't really have a voice, but more like the leaders of society that are there not by virtue alone, but by other means sometimes. The curators, the Medici families, the ones that are patrons, and those influence so much what's going on. Of course, there's so many other factors. And sometimes it's difficult to start from one of these sides and just promote something that is beautiful, truly beautiful and universal, as we talked about, that people relate to. But I think the answer is just do your best not to be isolated. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity that we have today through the internet. And I know that it's so easy to be distracted because I think one of the greatest, how should I put it in one term, the greatest difficulties that we have in this generation is that we lack focus, probably more than any other generation that ever lived on the face of the earth. Because I do believe that there's nothing new under the sun, but this is the specificity of the 21st century. It's very fast, and all this access that we have to so many gadgets does not give us a qualitative advantage. It so often incorsetates us and doesn't allow us to focus on what we should do, on the meaning of life, on the meaning of our lives. And so I'm so happy that you brought again the subject of New Masters Academy and this platform and the opportunity that we all have to connect with these people. And this is what takes us out of the gray zone, the fog.
Yeah.
Just being with the community.
Yeah, you're touching on the huge challenges that we face in the 21st century as artists loving traditional art. And sometimes I feel like nothing can be harder to have this deep love for drawing, painting, and sculpture, art forms that have been established hundreds of years ago, and doing that today because, as you say, the world is fast-paced, and now we're facing artificial intelligence, and social media is extremely distracting, and so it is challenging. But I think it's also this great opportunity to create strong people that really deeply, genuinely love what they do. And you kind of are forged by this modern world. So we have all the tools available to us, right? We have all the information available to us online. Like, it's never been more information just on your fingertips. If you want to learn anything, you just have to put effort into learning it. So the tools are here. But why do we feel that often our artwork is not as strong and beautiful as artwork created hundreds of years ago. So that's the big question that a lot of artists ask themselves. And the answer to that, so it's hard to interpret the way of living, the way of creating from our modern point of view, how people were creating back then, when the entire society was like kind of like pulling on one string and agreeing on this is the artwork that we together want to create. Like if we just been to Italy, and Josh has been offering his Renaissance drawing approach to students in Italy. And we took students to museums, and I was giving some art history lectures about like the artwork that we were seeing. And so it was very prevalent, the gap between like the richness and the excellence of arts that was done in Florence, Italy in the Renaissance, the cradle of the Renaissance, and to what the outcome that we can produce now. So that was like, I mean, the greatest extreme contrast, right? Like seeing Florence and going after churches and museums and seeing like every building is adorned with arts, and inside of it there's more art, and everywhere is like this brilliant art. So, and I think it evoked also something in the students to ask themselves exactly that question, like where are we here, and why can we not create things similar to that? And then, you know, trying to give the background of like, well, in the Renaissance Italy, there was art was appreciated by everybody. There was like even the Medici, who were considered the richest, most powerful family in Europe at the time. They did not, you know, only invest their money in whatever they were like investing it in their banking. They took a huge chunk out of their wealth and invested it in art. Who does that now? Like there's like a whole system to it. But that's just one aspect. That's the economic aspect. But then there's another one where the artists were apprenticed in an early age. No distractions. But then they also, exactly. I think, what was that?
Yeah, exactly. No distractions. That's
no distractions too. But I think more importantly, without just, okay, no distraction is one aspect, but more importantly is that they had more like a common belief that they agreed on, and that is very present. And that common belief, I don't know, I cannot just like put that in one box, because it's very hard. Again, like we are people in the modern world not knowing what that common belief was, but you can read it from the artwork. So one thing I think they all kind of had in common, which is that they honored beauty as something beyond themselves. You can call it divine. You can call it like faith in God that they used to have, or faith in some sort of philosophy. But in my perspective, they did see the ideal of beauty as something that is more important than themselves, and that they really dedicated their life to. And you can see that like even in Michelangelo's sculptures, Leonardo da Vinci, who was more seen as like a scientist often, like a natural scientist. But even he, I think there was not a single artist that didn't have this underlying belief that we have to honor that kind of beauty by giving our whole life to that, and taking kind of like ourselves out of that. Now you can challenge that and say like, well, Leonardo da Vinci had a huge ego, and Michelangelo had a huge ego. I think these men had huge egos too. But you see that also in his scriptures, like Leonardo even said, like, oh, at the deathbed, if that was even said, we don't know. But he wrote a lot down, and he was talking about like how he thought, and I don't know the exact quote, but like, I think I offended God and mankind because the artwork did not live up to the level it should be. Not quote, it's like along these lines. But I do like that, the meaning of that. And so it says a lot. It says that clearly the output that they had, like the hard work that they put into, it was not only to make themselves a name, it was also that they strongly believed in something universal together. And that was not like, they did not need to have that explained to them, because it was so present in their society anyway. If you know what I mean. Like today we have all this information, and yet we starved of meaning.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely. There's so many disruptions, and you're right. I mean, you put everything so beautifully, and you made me think. If I were to just simplify a little bit what you said, I was just going to sound too reductionist, but it's relationships. It's a common belief system or a common faith, and art should help us look at ideals, at things that are eternal, at God, at perfection. And I think what I heard personally from my friends and talking with people around, I think there's also this fear. Probably I mentioned it before in this video. There's a fear because we look at the art of the Renaissance or the art of the ancient classical Greeks, the Hellenistic Greeks, the Roman veristic style, which is so realistic, hyper realistic, I would say. We're just afraid of it because we look at it as if we looked into a mirror and we realize that we do not live in a perfect world and everything is broken, and we don't like to compare ourselves to that somehow, and it seems elitist and something that is not achievable and therefore should not be pursued. But as you pointed that out implicitly and explicitly throughout this interview, is that we should focus on what is bigger than ourselves, what is greater than ourselves, because we'll get lost if we focus on us alone, I think. And these things will never reach in this lifetime, in my opinion. It's like an asymptotic process. We're just going there, and this awe and the sense of wonder, I think it's one of the most defining things about beauty, that we look at it and we get lost in this adoration of the ideal that it represents. So it just made me think about all these grand things, and it's also the vision that we're afraid of, I think, today, to think in terms of what are we going to leave behind for the next generations. It's a scary thought.
I would like to add something to the idea of losing yourself and seeing beauty as something greater than yourself. I think in some ears that could sound like kind of like, where am I then? Like, where's my self-expression? Where's my creativity? Where's my idea? I love all that. I do not want to misinterpret it. Yes. It sounds like, oh, you just, give yourself up and then you work really, really hard. It sounds kind of like torturous. But let me offer another perspective to that, because I think it can be incredibly rewarding in moments of struggle and liberating, actually. So when I understood that, and I want to tie it back to meeting Professor Chang Kunlun, who is a very established sculptor from China, and he has been through all his spiritual journey. And I'm not saying you have to be spiritual to experience it, but let me try to phrase that that idea that if you get over yourself in a lot of ways, because we as humans change all the time, right? Our mood changes all the time. Emotions change all the time. It's not something we can really rely on. It's coming and going. And if you learn in moments of, let's say, crisis, or moments of not knowing how to move further, and moments is something I was really inspired by a moment ago, it's not interesting to me right now anymore. So these are things that artists go through. And so when I say let go of yourself, it's not this okay, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm maybe not even a Christian. I may not even believe in any divine existence. Let's say, that's not my thing. But let me offer that idea to try to get into a mindset where what you focus on takes you to places that you haven't sensed yet, because you haven't been there yet. And to do that, you have to kind of let yourself go, and your notions and your attitudes and all your thoughts and emotions. Because if you study traditional art techniques, there's a lot of unexpected gains after these walls you hit. So going through these periods and through over these hills where it's okay, I'm stuck here, and then kind of keep studying anyway. Keep getting engaged with what you're focusing on. So that's a different approach that bringing what's inside of me to the artwork versus focusing on what I am doing and immersing myself in it and learning more and more about that. And it takes you to other places, and it takes you, like, it opens up ideas of beauty, like things that you didn't even know before. So that's I think is the learning moment. And if we, like, too early on, like I was told as a teenager, bring in yourself, you don't know that world yet if you haven't, like, let go of yourself for a minute and just kind of, like, focus on what you're doing, and then let you go on this odyssey. And so go on this odyssey, go, like, be an explorer and adventure, and, like, really see what is behind these walls of frustration and everything. And I think there's an element to letting go of yourself. To me, I would call that spiritual. Not everybody uses that language, and I understand. But that, to me, is like a moment of letting go of self and learning and opening up your mindset and really enriching yourself with something new, and then using that for your creativity. So that, I think, is the liberating aspect that I think a lot of people oversee in traditional art techniques. So when the modern argument is like, oh, it's liberating, we don't have to focus on traditional art techniques any longer, we can just express ourselves without it, I find that the most limiting. That is so limiting because my tools are extremely limited. Like, I can only use what I have at this one moment. I haven't enriched myself. I haven't gone onto any adventure yet, and I haven't, conquered any treasures, and I haven't, like, gotten all the treasures out of, like, all the difficulties. Like, so that, to me, is the big difference. So the reason why I'm trying to explain is maybe in a little bit complicated way, but the reason I want to try to explain is to also share with other artists that may be watching this that giving yourself up in the art is not torturous. It's actually rewarding and liberating, and it enriches you with more knowledge and more tools and more things you can use to make the artwork that you want to make. And that's, I think, tradition is powerful for that. So and you know that too, coming from Romania, tradition was challenged very often as something liberating and something we need to let go of. But think of tradition in a way where traditio really means to hand over. So you're giving something from generation to generation, something that artists thought about before my existence, and lots of masters have mastered, and you can take advantage of that and study that and then learn it and go on to that journey, even though it's hard. But then, like, there is a way to add yourself in that, and then it's coming from a very informed, cultivated, beautiful place. And so that is the more liberating and empowering versus, like, let go of tradition, just, like, express yourself in whatever way you want to. So that's been something I learned later in life. Like, I haven't had that understanding until also met certain people that gave me insight into that, which I'm really grateful for. But I now am at the standpoint that we need to honor tradition in order to really create informed, cultivated, beautiful artwork that really connects with people, that people can understand and really be moved by. And then maybe, like, beauty is something that happens when you do not have to, like, intellectualize things so much. You just kind of, like, experience it. You don't have to know that much even. You, like, just look at that and you're moved in your heart. Like, you're, like, just moved by it. You do not need to have gone to art school and know a ton. Because when I was a child, walking through Salzburg, seeing these fountains, seeing these churches, seeing, like, all these beautiful artworks, I knew nothing, but I was so moved. I was so impressed. I think to recognize beauty, all you need to be is a human being. Then you can recognize beauty. So. But an artist who wants to offer beauty has to go through this journey, through this odyssey of learning and overcoming yourself in order to offer that to other people, so they can recognize that beauty.